Welcome back to the Wallace branch, and today we're continuing our build of the smelter area in Kellogg. This time, heading up the valley to the huge zinc plant and its stack that towered over the entire valley. As you can see, this time I'm not doing the blender part of asset creation on camera, but let me say this was a tough one, just as time-consuming as the smelter. And just like the smelter, I didn't have any Sanborn maps, just Google and the USGS map. But there were relatively more photos of the zinc plant from more angles, plus the footprint of the zinc plant is still visible on Google, and actually it's in the terrain of the Trainz dam as well. As with the smelter, the building changed a lot over time, mostly by adding new buildings. It also had a lot of track, including a loop to enable serving the upper part of the plant. I think the loop extended right back to the smelter originally, but was later shortened. So it's the shorter version that I decided to model here. A bit of history: Bunker Hill and Hecla had jointly invested in the Star Mine in Burke and Morning. The ore from the Star Mine had a relatively high zinc content, and because there was no plant in the district to treat the zinc sulfide concentrates, erection of an electrolytic zinc plant was decided on by the Sullivan Company. It was designed by Wallace G. Wolfe and U.C. Tainton, and construction began in 1926. Operation commenced in August 1928. Thus adding a third major activity to Bunker Hill after the smelter and the mine. The plant ran continuously until May 1st, 1930, when the low price of metals and the decreased demand for slab zinc made curtailment advisable. But by 1936, the price of the metal had increased to the point where full capacity was again attained. Zinc production reached a record level during World War II, and Bunker Hill was able to supplement its zinc refining operations with the addition of a cadmium plant. The technological process that was devised for the zinc plant was the first of its kind and was recognized as a significant new development in the field. Silver operations on a larger scale than ever before added still another phase to Bunker Hill's business. And I had to add a big loop of track, and hence it was necessary to add a couple of baseboards. I had identified early on that I would need to do that, but Trainz dam is hard enough that even though I had just started the layout, I opted not to add the baseboards at that time, and that would have entailed redoing the Trainz dam from scratch. You'll see in the background that at various points I had just barely started doing the terrain on those new baseboards, so you'll see some gigantic green cliffs there. I did the terrain off camera. The grade on the tracks is pretty steep, but perhaps it's realistic given that I essentially follow the path of the terrain, and there really aren't any other options, any other grades to follow. You will notice me here testing a boxcar in one of the tracks, and later, rest assured, I came back and edited the buildings for size.
even though I thought I had originally measured very carefully, apparently not. Around this area, the HD terrain has some issues with moving terrain as the camera approaches the steep slopes, and in those situations, the track can seem to float above the terrain, even from relatively close distances, and that ruins the immersion. So one thing I did to address that was adding some concrete retaining walls along the tracks. But still, moving terrain is a distraction, I find. I also added some more interior walls so you can't see through the end of the buildings when you're driving inside.
The big pipe leading uphill to the stack was created specifically for this asset, but still placing it down was a big headache. And I did make several attempts here, but as you can see, the pipe wasn't really fitting, which led me to have to go start digging into the terrain. And then ultimately I had to go back and I added a few more segments to make the pipe long enough to fit into the space. This is another PBR asset. You can see the pipe existed in the original stack, and then it continued serving the new stack, which was built in the 1970s. The plant had a lot of buildings around it. Just uphill of the plant, there were several houses, including a very nice one that could have been the plant manager's. And then there were these Quonset huts and parking lots as well. There was a large electrical substation and some kind of cooling ponds that seemed to have grown over time. This substation was actually the reason why I created the substation asset in the first place, and I just really wasn't satisfied with those that were available on the DLS. For the ponds, I just modified the one I made for the Pottsville hatchery to make it a bit wider and bigger. Here I'm creating a bit of a tank farm area, which evidently had a few tracks serving it, and I expect there were quite a few chemicals and gases used at the zinc plant. It'll be interesting to see what kind of operational interest the area can have. Definitely would be open to suggestions. Maybe this is a place for cars to pick up sulfuric acid. I imagine that Trainz can drop off ore cars at the top of the zinc plant and then pick up zinc ingots and cadmium ingots from the plant.
I believe the smelter invested in making phosphate for fertilizer to utilize some of the waste product from scrubbers that cleaned the emissions from the plant. But it may not have been profitable because of a collapse in prices for fertilizer, and maybe also the distance from the best agricultural markets. As the name electrolytic zinc plant implies, the facility used a lot of electricity. I created the switchyard originally for this plant, and now it's also at the concentrator facility and over by the paper mill in Pinehurst. And it's one of my favorite assets. And I also learned a lot about how substations and transformers work when I was making that. While I initially used just the same concrete fish pond from the hatchery, ultimately I felt that a larger one would better match the area, so this one was my second effort. This tank area is on a slope, and I have to say it doesn't look very good right now. It might be worth coming back and adding some concrete splines or even a dedicated fuel pad for the tanks to sit on, instead of just on the dirt like here. The whole residential area might seem too nice, but the final product blends in fairly well in my opinion, and it also matches what I see in the photos.
The next step is doing the terrain texturing in the vicinity of the zinc plant. As you can see from the photos, the terrain around the smelter and zinc plant was deeply affected by the pollution, and essentially nothing could grow there, even though the area was originally forested. After the plants closed, many believed that nothing would ever grow there ever again. The Spokesman Review tells the story of one visionary man, Ed Pomerenning, who has, largely through his own inventiveness, perseverance, and sweat, managed to help regrow the trees on the slopes. The article says, many local residents were openly skeptical of the reforestation effort, and Pomerenning couldn't walk into a bar without hearing mocking asides. He said, there was a whole pile of people who laughed at me. I was the dumb SOB who thought he could grow trees on the hillside. If anything, it made me work a little harder, he said. To me, all we needed to do was solve a problem, and I knew it could be done. Although the hills were barren, you can see plenty of odd greenery here and there. And at the risk of overdoing it, I am including a lot of shrubbery and smaller trees to break up the scenery and make the buildings blend in a bit better. Of course, adding in the trains, parked cars, people, smoke, random other poles and buildings, that all helps. And just a few more details here and there, some colors for the ground, some smoke for the different stacks around the plant. And with that, we are mostly done with the smelter area, one of the most important parts of this route. At this stage, I'd say we're roughly 2/3 done with the route, perhaps a little bit more. Next time, we'll be sticking around the western end of the route and moving on to Cataldo, which is the location of the old mission of the Sacred Heart, as well as a fictional steamboat dock. So, if you'd like to be there, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time on the Wallace branch.